days after a city councilman in Indianapolis basically had his home shot at, and there was a rock allegedly left that had
Exit the roundabout onto West Thurrock Way.
Pushback for data centers. So it's
in 300 yards, turn left towards Arterial Road, A1306. Turn left towards Arterial Road, A1306.
Very tense. As you mentioned, you have people talking about the existential threat that AI poses to the public, and I think that rhetoric is getting into hands of people who want to take violent actions. I would say a lot of the advocacy
in 300 yards, at the roundabout, take the 5th exit onto Ship Lane.
That they're frustrated by the violence because they don't feel it represents the whole picture. But, you know, I think the incident sort of sparked a wake-up call for a lot of people of, oh, wow, we've been talking a lot about these threats. We've been, you know, hearing industry pushback as well, you know, against regulations. They want to innovate, but it's clear these tensions are reaching new highs. So even though we're not seeing this as a major wide trend of violence, I think it's definitely causing alarm and also starting the blame game as to who is responsible for these tensions right now.
It's an interesting business around it, and so thank you very much for the Hill. Now, a sign of the seriousness of the shortage of jet fuel in Europe. Lufthansa is cutting 20,000 short-haul flights over the summer. Other airlines, mostly in Asia, have made cuts. Some have started applying fuel surcharges. Lufthansa does
exit the roundabout onto Ship Lane.
6 weeks of jet fuel supplies remaining. Let us talk to John Strickland, aviation
flights, which even in normal times perhaps wouldn't be so full. But given now, not so much a question about shortage of fuel, but the incredibly high price of fuel, which has doubled over the last year, they probably looked at that in the cold light of day and said, right, let's nip these out, prune these back right now early before we inconvenience people who may get booked. And that gives us more certainty to run the rest, while airlines are talking with regulators and fuel suppliers about making sure they ideally keep the supply they expect or find alternative sources to make up shortfalls which may arise because of the fuel not coming out of the Gulf.
Strait of Hormuz. Well, look, I mean, I mentioned it as a European problem. Spirit Airlines in the US has gone begging for help and saying we're in a bit of trouble and we can't get some help. United, I think, have made some
in a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, turn left onto High Street.
Is there just one global market in aviation fuel, or would the European market be slightly different to the US market because, you know, an airport in the US is a different product? Fuel at an airport in the US is a different product from fuel at an airport in Europe.
There is a divided market or a geographically focused market around the world. Obviously, the Gulf tends to supply extensively to Europe, including the UK, and to some points in Asia. There are suppliers out of Africa as well, because North America produces its own supply substantially, and indeed has started to export much more to the UK and Europe as this uncertainty about supplies from the Gulf, from the Straits of Hormuz challenge has become apparent. So there's a number of things going on. It is flexible. It's managed more by the oil companies and fuel suppliers and by the airlines themselves. But it's just worth coming back to your point about Spirit there, as an airline that is in a very weak financial state. This again is much more about the cost of fuel at the moment. As I said, it's doubled compared to last year.
In 300 yards, at the roundabout, take the second exit onto Mill Road.
Pounds more on fuel in that 1 month compared to a year earlier. So that's what airlines are wrestling with in the first instance. How do they absorb that? If they can't absorb it, how much can they pass on in ticket prices? So we have seen some rises, and that's rather separate from whether they actually have to cancel anything because of shortage. The cancellations are tend to happen where, as I mentioned, the price has gone higher, fuel, and some flights which are maybe not the strongest performers financially, they just make red ink.
And just what are the passenger rights here? I mean, if an airline says we can't afford to run that flight, they'll just give you your money back, send you an email and say, sorry, it's off, presumably.
That's the heart of it. Certainly airlines will do everything they can to get people rebooked, or I think in the case of Lufthansa, they'll avoid getting bookings at all on some flights they would expect to be poor performers. And they're in discussion, for example, with the UK government to say
in a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, continue straight to stay on Mill Road.
Crazy they're asked to pay compensation given we're all facing this war situation.
John Strickland, thank you for that. update on the situation facing the airlines. Now, adoption is for life. It is not reversible. That is the implication of a Supreme Court judgment this afternoon. The court turned down an attempt by an adoptive mother to undo her adoption of two sisters. Now, it was an interesting case because the two are older teenagers. They'd resumed contact with their birth mother, and everyone was on board with the idea of reversing the adoption, but the judges felt the principle of finality had to be upheld. Our news correspondent
In 200 yards, at the roundabout, take the first exit onto Sandy Lane,
Well, it is
B1335.
a significant and interesting case because everybody was in agreement. But the people who run adoptions and child professionals felt, pretty much all of them, that
Exit
if
the
you
roundabout
decide
onto
to be able to
Sandy
say to
Lane.
somebody, you can have a decision not to
Continue
be
on
adopted.
Sandy Lane for 3/4 of a
That would
mile.
make the adoption system a lot harder to run. And the Supreme Court looked at this case and decided that adoption orders are, quote, final, permanent and irrevocable, and that there are ways of dealing with situations where there are problems in adoption. There are all sorts of laws that have been introduced in the last 20 or 30 years to protect children, but that principle should remain, effectively saying that the state can be everybody's parent and decide who the parent can and should be. And so that is the way it's going to be, and it looks like that this is the final court that can look at this. But in this case, these two children are now adults, will not be able to say they are not adopted anymore, and their parent, the adoptive mother,
In 1/4 of a mile, at the roundabout, take the second exit onto New Road, A1306.
I mean, they can live presumably with whoever, or call whoever they want, mum, or I mean, so in that sort of sense, it's a sort of legal status that is unchanged, but their practical day-to-day life can be.
Absolutely, they are now adults effectively, and they can decide where they live. And I think in around 2021 they started living with their birth mother. So that's why this really came up, and one imagines that it's become more of a legal principle than a change to their lives. But I think there are other cases, and this isn't something that has never happened before. There are people who feel that they don't want to be somebody who has been adopted.
Exit the
and
roundabout
therefore
onto
this
New
principle
Road.
has been considered in the highest court.
Continue on New Road for 2 miles.
In which an adoption is reversible.
So the judges addressed this. It's quite hard to explain. There is a situation which came up in legislation in the 50s where, to avoid children feeling that they're illegitimate, they could opt out of an adoption where one of their parents, their birth parents, had adopted them over the other birth parent. And if that parent married, then they could say they're no longer adopted because they're no longer illegitimate because they've got two parents, effectively. But I think the judges also say that this is a situation where they have seen no evidence of this being cited as coming up in their consideration of the case.
All right, well, it seems very final and conclusive. Tom, thank you very much. Tom Simons there.
Alan Bennett's The Madness of George III.
George, hear me. Do you?
quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, take the second exit and stay on New Road, A1306.
Is skyrocketing. So plastics obviously derived from fossil fuels, there's huge costs going up there, but the other materials as well, just because the cost of energy has gone up, the manufacturing of those materials is therefore is going up too. So I think from a consumer point of view, we're not seeing that at the moment because the packaging that's on the shelf now has been produced a while
Exit the
back.
roundabout onto
I
Ballards
think what
Road.
we'll probably see is those costs kind of get passed down the line as
Keep
this
right to
packaging that's been
continue on
created
Church
now
Lane.
ends up basically in front of us.
You see, people often say the prices go up like a rocket and they come down when costs fall like a feather. But actually, the story here is really
In a quarter of a
people
mile,
have a price.
slight
They're
right
not gonna
towards
put it up
Church Elm
by
Lane.
1% or 2%. They wait for a bit and then it probably goes up 10% or something like that, is what I would guess with your packet
Yeah.
of coffee.
Absolutely. I guess it's what's in the system